Hey there, thanks again for ordering a Yucca manufacturing roof rack. We hope you enjoy it. Before we get started on the installation, it'll be worth making sure you have all your parts and pieces. Go ahead and lay out your crossbars in order from largest to smallest. Make sure you have your rear side panels, front side panels, side frames, your wind fairing, foot brackets, and additional hardware. For a full breakdown of all parts and pieces, a paper version of these instructions can be found by going to yuccamfg.com/installation guides. Go ahead and click on Bronco Sport roof rack and you'll find it right there. As for tools, you're going to need an Allen wrench, a 10mm wrench, a 13mm wrench, a 9/16 wrench, and a 10, 13, and 9/16 socket wrench. All right, now that we got our tools, it's time to get started. Go ahead and take your T-slot double nuts and slide 2 of them into the largest extrusion, the second largest extrusion, the 4th largest extrusion, and the 5th largest extrusion. Side doesn't matter, just go ahead and slide them in. All right, now we're on to side frames. Go ahead and grab your side frame and align it with your crossbars. Right now we want to make sure that the square tab on the side frame is aligned with the square profile of your extrusion. Additionally, the 2 holes that sit side by side on the side frame should be in line with the largest crossbar in your setup. Go ahead and grab your M8 screws and screw your crossbars into your side frame. I like to start by doing mine by hand first and then come back with the Allen wrench last. These should all be nice and snug, look something like this. All right, for our next step, we're gonna need our M6 bolts and our foot brackets. Go ahead and flip your foot bracket upside down and align the holes on the foot bracket with the T-slot double nuts that we slid into the crossbars earlier. Go ahead and lightly screw the M6 bolt into the T-slot double nut. It's very important that we leave these nice and loose so that the foot bracket moves freely and will help us adjust the rack once it gets on the car. Go ahead and repeat this so that you have the large flange on the foot bracket pointing outward, 2 to the left and 2 to the right. All right, moving right along here, we're gonna go ahead and grab our rubber tube and cut them into 4 even sections. After you cut them into 4 even sections, go ahead and cut a slice out of one end of the tube and slide it over the end of the U-bolt. This will help add some protection to your roof rails once we get the rack mounted on. All right, now it's time to attach our side panels to the frame itself. Go ahead and grab your M8 bolts, your lock nuts, your Allen wrench, and your 13mm socket or wrench. We're going to go ahead and align the side panels with the hole pattern on the side frames. Notice that our pre-bolted on extrusions should fit nicely with the cutouts that we've already added into the side panels. Tilt the side panel up so that it matches the hole pattern and pass the M8 bolt through both the panel and the side frame. And then take your lock nut and fasten it to the bolt on the other side. Again, I like to start with everything nice and loose, go through the entire hole pattern on the side panel, and then come back and tighten everything up. Once we've got the front panel secured, we're going to do the same exact thing with the rear panel. Go ahead and match up the hole pattern, pass the M8 bolts through, and tighten everything up. Repeat this step on the other side of the rack. Great job, we're moving right along. At this point, we can actually flip the roof rack over so that it's resting on the foot brackets. Be very careful when you do this since the foot brackets are still very loose and can slide around when you're moving it. Now that we got the rack in position, it's time to attach the wind fairing to the rack itself. For this step, we're going to need our 2 wind fairing brackets, the wind fairing, our Allen wrench, our 13mm socket, and our 13mm wrench, as well as our M8 bolts and lock nuts. First things first, we're going to go ahead and grab our wind fairing brackets and attach it to the side panels. Make note that the hole pattern on the wind fairing bracket should line up perfectly with the side panel. Go ahead and pass the M8 bolt through and lightly screw everything in. Once it's in, tighten it down and repeat on the other side. All right, now that we've attached our wind fairing brackets, it's time to put the wind fairing onto the rack. We're gonna go ahead and line it up so that the flat edge is facing down and the hole pattern from our wind fairing brackets matches the wind fairing. Now there's a little trick to this. The bolts that we just fastened the wind fairing bracket to the rack with are going to be really close to the bolt pattern that we're about to use to attach the wind fairing with. What I like to do is hold the nut flush to the bracket and then place the bolt through both the wind fairing and the bracket. I'm kind of giving you a demonstration here. This is easier said than done, so make sure you take your time. I like to start with the bottom left hole and then do the opposite corner so that the wind fairing kind of sits in place. Again, I'm just doing everything nice and light, getting all the holes matched up, and then I'm going to come back and tighten everything down. All right, great job with that last step. Now that everything's nice and fastened down and tightened up, it's a good opportunity to apply our sticker. These are fully waterproof and weatherproof stickers. It's up to you whether you want to put it on, but while the rack's not on the vehicle, you have a good opportunity to get it all centered and place it where you'd like. All right, let's get this roof rack on top of your car. First things first is we're going to go ahead and remove the antenna on top of your vehicle. This is pretty easy, just unscrew it. Then with a friend, starting from the rear of your vehicle, go ahead and guide the roof rack on top of the roof of your car. Before we do this, it's important to note that you're going to want some protective material on the roof of your car, like a blanket or some foam, so that you don't do any scratching. We're not going for alignment just yet. All we're doing is getting the roof rack onto the roof. Now we can start aligning the rack. The first thing we want to make sure is that the side frames and panels sit on the outside of the roof rails of your car. Once that's in place, we're going to go ahead and take the foot brackets and wedge them on top of your roof rails. Again, we're not really worried about getting everything perfectly centered right now. We just want to make sure everything's sitting where it's supposed to. Go ahead and slide those foot brackets over the rails, and we'll worry about alignment in the next step. Now we're on to our U-bolts. Go ahead and take your U-bolt and pass it underneath the roof rail and up through the bottom of the foot bracket. Once the studs are pointing out, we're going to go ahead and grab our washers and our nuts and lightly screw everything together. For some trim models, the U-bolts won't properly fit into the foot brackets, and for this we've provided a small spacer that'll allow you to properly pass the U-bolt underneath the rails and through the foot bracket. All right, great job so far. We're coming into the home stretch here. What we're gonna do is align the rack with the contours of the vehicle, making sure everything looks nice and parallel. The first view that we wanna make sure is lined up properly is the S-curve running along the side of the car. The rack and the S-curve on your car should have the same profile. And since everything is nice and loose on the rack right now, it's a good opportunity to make sure everything is matching up and the rack sits parallel above that S-curve. Our next alignment point is gonna be looking down the front of the vehicle. The rack should naturally sit between the jamb of the door and the roof rail. Go ahead and take a second and look down the line and make sure that everything looks lined up in center. We'll be doing this on the other side of the vehicle as well. It's important to make sure everything is centered before we tighten the rack down. Lastly, we're doing the same thing on the rear of the vehicle. The rack should sit along that jamb just like it did in the front. It's also helpful to take a couple steps back and look at the rack. Make sure it looks centered in comparison to the antenna on the top of your car. All right, we're on our last step. By now, the rack should be nicely centered on top of the vehicle, and everything should be looking just the way you like it. Go ahead and grab your 9/16 wrench and your 10mm socket or wrench. We're going to be going back up on top of the car and tightening everything down. Here are a couple pro tips for you as you tighten everything down. For the U-bolt, as you tighten the nuts down, they'll bottom out on the U-bolt. Make sure that these are nice and snug. Don't over-tighten this area. As for the M6 screws holding the foot bracket into the crossbars, go ahead and tighten them down in an X pattern, alternating from side to side. This will just help make sure everything gets tightened with the same tightness on the same level into the crossbars. Voila! Your rack is finally installed. Great job. Before we start doing any fun stuff, it's important to make sure we do some safety checks. Go ahead and grab the rack while you're standing up next to your car and forcefully shake it back and forth. The entire vehicle should move and not just the rack. If you hear any rattling or the rack is moving independently of the car, then you know something's not tightened down properly. Go ahead and address whatever issues you might be seeing. The second is take a quick joyride around the block with your window down. This is going to help us hear if there's any sort of wind noise, vibration, or loose screws rattling around that maybe you missed when you were tightening things down. Once you've done your safety checks, your rack is now ready to use. If you have any issues at all, you can always email us at hello@yuccamfg.com or DM us on Instagram. Again, my name's Jake, and I really hope you enjoy your Yucca roof rack.